Hello and welcome to the cryptocurrency news channel. So we're going to talk about economic cost and cost of living again in this video. And this is because an oft brought up subject um, in chat is like the real rate of inflation. Now the CPI has been 2 to 3%, and there's all these videos on saying why there's like hidden costs or whatever. But we're going to actually take a look at this from another angle in that, Americans are basically looking for a higher quality of life now than back 30, 40 years ago, and they want to pay about the same price. And that's actually why it seems like things are getting more expensive. If you want the same quality of life you had in 1980, 1990, it's actually not any more expensive. And we're going to look at the cost of housing as a very easy way to actually exemplify this point. So the thing about this is the average house in 2019 compared to the 1950s, yes, the average housing cost has increased, but you know why? It's because the average size of a new single family home has more than doubled since 1950. In 2019, and this is from Vone News, a new single family home was 2,584 square feet. That's a fairly average house. That's before my parents bought the last house. The house I lived in when I was like a teenager in my early 20s was around that size. So that's an average house in 2019, 2,584 square feet. The average house in the 1950s was around like 1,300 square feet. So yes, your housing costs are going to go up comparatively because you have a much bigger house. And since 1973, I believe that the average house was only like 1,600, 1,700 square feet. And now you're having 2,600 square feet. So you're getting a full 30%, 40% larger, actually a full 50% larger than even in the 1970s. And that's why the price of your house has actually gone up. The price of housing has definitely gone up for the average American because the average American was living in a much smaller space in the 1950s and 1970s. So comparatively, as a portion of your salary, more of it should go into housing because you're living in a better house. You can't expect to live in a better house while paying the same amount of money. Let's actually look at food as well. Americans have been eating more than ever. That's actually part of the reason your food bill has gone up. And you know what's a great way to tell how that is? Because Americans are fat. They're really fat. They're much fatter than they were before, like several decades ago. And that's the problem. Like compared to like maybe 1950, 1960, they are fatter. They just eat more food, and probably like maybe not food that's not quite as good. Although like healthy eating has been a trend, but like healthy food also costs more money. But Americans have been just consuming more food, and that's why they're fat. And if you're consuming more food, obviously your food bill is going to go up. They want higher quality food. They want tastier food. They want more snacks and stuff like that. So obviously your food bill is going to go up, and that's why Americans are more obese than before. And that's just kind of proof that we're consuming more food, and our food bills should be higher because we're eating more. And that actually goes into health as well. Now, healthcare is one of the things that's inflated the most year by year. I think it's like 8%, 10%, something like that. Part of that, yes, is because health insurance companies are evil. I'm not going to argue with that because that's absolutely 100% true. And they basically squeeze us for all we've got. That is absolutely 100% true. But there's another half of that. The other half of that is we're fat. And because of the fact that we're fat, we have more health problems. So even if they weren't evil, and even if they tried to keep health costs in check, you would be spending on average more for your health care because the average American is more obese, they're fatter, and they're not as healthy as they were because they're eating a lot more food. So essentially, like you are kind of like your own cause of that. Like part of that health insurance cause is because of us. Now, I would say like probably 70% of it is because of health insurance company greed, but there's like a good 30, 40% of it that is actually on Americans themselves. So even if like I said, even if the health insurance companies weren't evil, you'd still have kind of the same problem, just to a lesser degree. But that's not because prices and inflation have caused it. It's because you're just not as healthy as before because of eating habits. And if you're eating more food, obviously your food bill is going to be more. If you're living in a bigger house, you're also going to be paying more for mortgage or rent. Now let's actually look at the average car. The average car compared to 1990 has actually inflated at less than 2% a year. Like the average Corolla in 1990, I think cost about 60, 70% less than the average Corolla right now. And that's actually less than 2% compounded each year since 1990. But people are looking at the cheapest car possible in 1990 compared to the cheapest car now. Now, the cheapest car possible in the 1990 was like a Yugo or something. It was like $5,000, $6,000 versus the cheapest car now is actually a Chevy, a 2019 Chevy Spark. And you can actually buy a 2019 Chevy Spark new for $14,000. And obviously 5,000 less than half of 14,000. But here's the thing: do you know why the Yugo is not here anymore or went out of business? It's not because it's because no one wanted them. They basically gave a product that no one actually wanted. And the thing is, like, the Chevy Spark, honestly, like, it's cheap, it's there, but realistically, if I looked at all my friends, not one of them have the Spark. Not even the people that are actually like saying like, "Oh, I can't afford this, I can't afford that." None of them want to buy this car. They want a Corolla, and that's just personal preference as well. That's also just personal preference. So you want a better car than like a Yugo of 1990, so you're going to pay more. And really, realistically, like when I was here in 1990, I didn't really see that many Yugos. People just didn't want them, so they were basically just driven out of the market because like the demand just wasn't there after a while, and they just couldn't really sustain it. Um, yeah, the Chevy Spark is $14,000, but I don't know how well it sells because I don't know anyone that actually has one. The Chevy Spark hatchback. People opt for more expensive cars, even though the cheaper ones are actually there. So that's another like cost of living upgrade. You don't realize it because like everyone else has a Corolla as well or something comparable to that. You don't really realize it, but realistically, you're asking for an upgrade from like a Yugo, and it's not really an upgrade because no one really like had a Yugo back in 1990 either. I don't remember anyone actually having an actual Yugo um, that they actually bought new. So like you want a better house, you want to eat more food, and you want a better car, and now you're complaining that the cost of living is more expensive. Of course, it's more expensive because you want more stuff. Let's take a look at some of the other things. There are a lot of hidden expenses, and they've been kind of ingrained into us over the last 30 years. Like think about 1990. No one had $1,000 cell phones. They didn't have to pay the cell phone bill each month. Everyone just had a landline, which is a lot cheaper. You didn't have not everyone had a laptop or a computer. You didn't have to pay a high-speed internet bill each month. Those things were just not there in 1990. And they're almost, I wouldn't say they're essential for right now, but a lot of people just demand those conveniences right now, like they're necessities. But for most people, at least those who don't work in tech, you don't have to have a cell phone. You can actually go with a landline. You don't have to have a fancy laptop. Your work will generally just issue you one if they really need you to have one. You don't have to have high-speed internet access. You can actually go to live the Amish lifestyle and basically like cut out hundreds of dollars worth of expenses each month, which will actually affect your bottom line by a lot. But the thing is, these are all conveniences that people actually demand. And if you want conveniences in a capitalistic society, you got to pay for them. And these are expenses that we didn't actually have back then. But the thing is, we didn't have any of this stuff back then either. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have high-speed internet and all this entertainment stuff. You can actually live without it. Trust me, I went to Haiti for a missions trip a couple of years ago, and I lived without it for a couple of weeks. It was fine. I didn't die. So you could actually live without it and actually cut down your bill by a large amount. And with computers and internet, it's not only that. All your like online subscriptions, like if you're a gamer, you probably spend a lot of time like playing games, like buying gear and stuff like that. Maybe the microtransactions, like even the microtransactions on your little Candy Crush game or cell phone game, that everything adds up, and that amounts to hundreds of dollars each month. And that's hundreds of dollars of really unnecessary expenses. And if you took all that away, you'd have the same quality of life as you did back in 1980 or 1990 before you had any of that stuff. You just want these extra conveniences, but you don't want to pay for them. So it seems like since you have to pay for them because we're a capitalistic society, it seems like the cost of living has gone up, but for the same quality of life. But in reality, it is a much, much heightened quality of life because you have a better car. Because as bad as this thing is, even if you bought this, it's better than it's much better than a Yugo. Your house, like the average American house, has grown by 60-70% since the 1970s. You're eating more food, and your healthcare, you're just not as healthy, so your healthcare is going to like cost more. So that's actually why like the cost of living has seemingly gone up for a lot of people. But inflation really isn't any more than the CPI 2 to 3% per year. Now, like I said, like tuition, the cost of tuition and like the cost of health insurance is way more than 2%. But then again, things like like electronics, the cost of like cars generally for like the same car like Corolla is actually much more. It's actually less than the rate of inflation, so it balances out. And stuff like food and gas, it's about 2% a year. Gas might seem like an outlier, but really it isn't. Like in 1990, the average price for a gallon of gas across the country is 116. Right now, it's about 240. So it's about double in about 30 years, and that's about 2% compounded year after year. So the thing is, like, people are actually demanding more out of their life now than 30 years ago. And if you demand more, you kind of have to pay more. And people want to pay the same. So it seems like the cost of things have gone up. The other thing is, like, even though inflation has been about, 2 to 3% per year, your salary hasn't gone up as much. I think your salary's gone up, like people, average person salary's gone up maybe like 1 to 1.5% a year. So it's a discrepancy of about 1% a year, and compounded over 30 years, that is actually a lot of money. So that's why like people think they can't afford as much as they could 30 years ago, is because their salary hasn't grown as much as inflation. Like, your salary goes up like 1.5 per year, inflation is 2.5, so you're losing about 1% a year. And compounded over 30 years, that's like 40-50%, so you can't buy nearly as much stuff. And the other thing is they demand more amenities and they demand more luxuries than they had 30 years ago. So hope you found this video interesting. I gave you some numbers from some of the research sites I got like, how much the average house size has grown. The thing about like not every, even though the cheapest car is $14,000, a lot of people opt to buy $25,000 cars even though they're poor. So that's kind of the reason why everything seems to have grown so much. Part of it is because salaries haven't kept pace with inflation, and it's just because and part of it is because you just demand more stuff than you did like 30 years ago. So hope you enjoyed this segment. Like and subscribe and hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.